Welcome to the Odds Breakers, number one place for shared, sharp betting information.
Welcome back to podcast 21 of 2024. I'm your host, Kiev O'Neill. You can follow me on Twitter at OBKiev. Follow us at the Odds Breakers. Follow us on social media / the Odds Breakers. This episode is brought to you by BetMGM. Bet $5, get $150 worth of free bets. Yes, I'm talking to you guys in North Carolina, brand new to sports betting. Terms, conditions, and location apply. You want as many outs as you can during the NCAA tournament for line value. If you'd like to support the Odds Breakers and benefit from our premium plays, please visit theoddsbreakers.com, click shop, and become a member. Pick any of our winning cappers to get the premium plays for line moves, including myself. And if nothing else, please visit the Odds Breakers and become a free Picks and Telegram subscriber. $100 gets you all of my March Madness plays to become a 1-month member. Just check out theoddsbreakers.com. Use the bonus code basketball2024. We have a great show for you today because it is time to break down the games, and no better person to do it with than the creator of one of the best efficiency sites in all of college basketball, in Erik Haslam from Haslam Metrics. We're going to talk about Thursday games, maybe even get into a little Friday games, as well as the committee and all the wonderful and terrible things they did to build this bracket. But before Erik comes on, I want to remind you guys, we have a free bracket challenge. All you got to do is retweet this podcast or write a 5-star review. Send a screenshot of that to info@theoddsbreakers.com. $500 we are giving away completely for free. Check out the link in this podcast description. But not only that, if you want to check out a huge contest, over $42,000 in prizes for the Big Five, go to this season, www.theszn.com/OB for $10 off, which brings it down from $40 to $30. Get in all 5 contests, including the big one, as well as a survivor bracket and a upset bracket where you pick the upsets and you get rewarded for that. That's real March Madness when it comes to me. Getting rewarded for picking the higher seeds. That is awesome stuff. Check us out, www.theszn.com/OB, or just click on the link to this podcast description. Well, we have a lot to cover, obviously, and man, brackets are flying in. Bets are being made. We've had some big bets already in place for March Madness. We're going to give a few free plays away, obviously, like we always do in the NCAA tournament. We're also going to cover the quadrants. I'm going to take a couple quadrants, cover maybe 4 games apiece. Sean Kanaki's going to take a couple quadrants, cover a few games apiece as well. So we can actually have some articles out for you by Thursday morning and Friday morning to check out our leans and plays and reasoning for making some bets or staying away from bets in these amazing March Madness games. So stay tuned for that. But man, it's such an interesting bracket this year because, yes, it's definitely wrong and there's some misseeds. But, you know, for all the people complaining about the Mountain West, are you picking them in their 11 seed? You know, are you going to pick those higher seeded Mountain West teams? Because if you're complaining about it, that means you're going to pick it, right? If you're not going to pick it, then maybe they should be down there. You know, I mean, do you want all 6 and 7 seeds? What do you think? Some of them deserve a 4 seed out of the Mountain West? I think the Mountain West is lucky to get 6 teams in, and the Big East sitting there with the best team and one of the top 8, top 9 teams in Marquette are sitting there with only 3 bids, you know, Creighton, Marquette, and UConn, while you left out St. John's, you left out Seton Hall, Villanova, even though I'm glad they're left out. And to be honest with you, I'm glad that 4 of those teams are left out. If you want to go all the way down to Xavier. But in Providence at 54. But you have Virginia at 69, right? I mean, you have Butler ranked higher than them, Ken Pom. Seton Hall ranked higher than them. Xavier, Providence, Villanova, St. John's. All these teams are ranked higher than them. So what is this net ranking? Obviously, this is the biggest gripe, and you've heard this a million times, so I don't need to get too far into it. But then again, Virginia, they're not going to be playing too far from home if they get by this game on Tuesday night. I'm actually recording this on Tuesday at about 1 o'clock Pacific time for now. And then our wonderful guest, Erik Haslam, is going to come on a little bit later. But I just want to mention that. I'm going to mention some of the trendy picks. Some people are picking Charleston over Alabama. Some people are picking Grand Canyon over St. Mary's. Some people are picking James Madison over Wisconsin. It's almost like the committee always hates my Badgers. And I don't know why that is, because they prove it by putting all these mid-major teams facing each other, except for Wisconsin. Now, I want mid-major teams to face Power 5, but why is it always Wisconsin that gets picked on? Right? I mean, hopefully Wisconsin gets by and plays Duke from a fan perspective. But, man, that James Madison is going to be such a trendy pick. I wonder if picking Wisconsin might be better off for yourself to try to advance in this bracket. You know, there's a couple of those. A lot of people picking FAU over Northwestern. I mean, that's a 8-9 situation, so no big deal on that. But you have UAB over San Diego State. This is going to be a trendy 5-12. McNeese over Gonzaga. That's insane to me, but there's going to be some people picking that. Well, it's probably the teams that we're not even thinking about, like Creighton, who could get upset by Akron, or Texas getting upset by Virginia/Colorado State. That wouldn't surprise me. What if St. Peter's upsets Tennessee? Hell, what if Longwood upsets Houston? You know, I mean, it's funny that a lot of times in March Madness, it's the teams that you don't even think of that get upset in the beginning of this bracket. Hell, Yale might beat Auburn, you know. And all this talk about UConn being in the toughest bracket and being punished, yeah, they're being punished and it's top heavy, but what if Iowa State loses to Washington State or Drake, right? You know, what if that happens? What if what if Auburn gets bounced by like a San Diego State, or, you know, or God forbid UAB, or Yale, like I mentioned earlier? BYU passes up Illinois. Iowa State has a bad shooting day and loses. Then all of a sudden, UConn's quadrant becomes easy. But you can say the same things for all these teams if UConn gets bounced. So the truth is that the hardest quadrant could end up being easy. So don't overthink this. If you like a team, you might want them to advance, just depending upon the kind of bracket that you're filling out. But these are all topics that I also want to get into a little bit with Erik Haslam. So without further ado, let's get into the show. Get into the brackets, get into the committee, get into some of these wonderful games that we're going to be playing for Thursday night with our wonderful guest from Haslametrics, Mr. Erik Haslam. This segment was brought to you by AG1. Why take a bunch of different things when you can just mix one scoop of powder and water once a day? Every scoop is packed with 75 vitamins, minerals, probiotics, and whole food source ingredients of high quality that give me major benefits like gut and mood support, boosted energy, and even healthier looking skin, hair, and nails. If you want to take ownership of your health, try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/oddsbreakers or click on our podcast episode description. Now I'm very excited to welcome back an analytics and bracket specialist to the Oddsbreakers in Mr. Erik Haslam from Haslametrics.com. You can follow Erik on Twitter at Haslametrics. Well, here we are, my man. We have brackets. It is time. It is your time, Erik. This is your time. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Yeah, we finally arrived. It's the long marathon is coming to its end. We got the 3-month stretch here, or excuse me, 3-week stretch, and then we wrap up the season. But man, yeah, this is the week. This is the week where Christmas morning happens for a lot of college basketball fans. So yeah, Thursday and Friday should be a blast.
Oh, without a doubt, man. It's been so exciting. Little sleep, back and forth, just looking at brackets, filling out my main one, and that's the one I always stand by, so I'll talk a little bit about that. But, of course, I always throw out some smaller ones, too, because I just like having fun and getting in people's bracket challenges. It's always a great time for me, my favorite time of year. But, just crazy conference tournaments. I thought a lot of bid stealers. What are some of the crazy things you noticed last weekend and even the week before, if you want to talk about these conference tournaments?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think one of the big things, as far as the craziest thing in the tournament, I think you got to look at that MAC final between Kent State and Akron. Gut-wrenching situation where they go ahead, and then the one guy not knowing how much time is on the clock and whether they're up or they're down, he fouls. And as a result, that one decision, and someone wrote it on social media and said, I wonder how much that one bad decision cost, how much money that cost Kent State. And you got to think like later on, I mean, if Kent State gets in the tournament and all of a sudden makes a run, what does that do for their program? Just one, I mean, crazy, one mistake and, ruin everything like that. It's unfortunate. You hate to see that happen to one player. Just well,
it was too many what ifs though, because they had 4 or 5 seconds. Right. That guy was charging. I could have seen a whistle happening to him or him hitting a shot. I mean,
right.
I felt terrible for the kid, and it reminded me of that J.R. Smith situation on LeBron's team where he did something really.
He's pointing and saying, "What are you doing? What are you doing?"
Yeah.
Right, but then other stuff too, like the NC State making a run, a 5-game run in the ACC. That's something I never really see coming. Whenever I see those opening round games in the Big East and the ACC, and I think to myself, "Oh, these poor teams, they really probably won't have a shot." And I don't know why they're playing this game. Well, there you go. We saw that a few years ago with Georgetown in an opening round game in the Big East. I think that was 2 years ago, and then this year with NC State making a run, getting hot at the right time. Other than that, I would say it would have meant something maybe if there weren't so many bid stealers or if they were more in the conversation. But I thought that DePaul game against Villanova was particularly interesting, where DePaul, and then Justin Moore hits that shot, in theory saves them, but it really was all for naught. It could have made a compelling story had DePaul won, or Villanova won and continued to win after that, but it really kind of just petered out. That game really ended up meaning a whole lot of nothing, but still at the time it was pretty crazy to see a DePaul team who I think was an underdog by about 23 or something that game actually be knocking on the door of a big upset win over Villanova.
Well, I know a certain sports bettor that laid 29,000 to win 1,000 on that game, and that came really close to him. And
oh my God,
I mean. DePaul just choked at the end, and it's just they are such a bad team, but Villanova's just all over the place. They look bad too, and they just you can tell that they were way more skilled than DePaul. It's just they were missing shots and just looking haphazard, kind of like DePaul was, but it just took them that last 3-pointer and that 3-pointer hit. It's just
right.
That was crazy at the end, and I was watching that. But yeah, NC State, I feel like they lied to me all year. It's like because I'm the kind of guy that would bet 85-1 on them if I had an inkling that they were going to do something like that. So, and it's not even they didn't just make a run; they won the whole thing.
Right.
Because you can say, teams that made a run that, kind of lost at the end, Colorado and, a few others. Who am I thinking of? VCU made a run against Duquesne, but Duquesne obviously finished it out too. But there's teams that this year that just stole bids, and I thought that was really interesting. But, going into the bracket, I guess the next question would be, how do you think the committee did? Bear in mind, obviously, bid stealing and all the things that came through with it. How did they do on seeding these teams and creating the bracket itself, according to maybe your numbers on Haslametrics?
Well, slightly disappointing, and I think a lot of bracketologists across the board kind of said there were a lot of head scratchers. I kind of thought there were going to be I would say there was a jaw dropper or two that I kind of expected of a team that a lot of people probably thought might be on the 8-line or 9-line that fell out of the field. The jaw dropping really for me was just some of the puzzling seed lines that some of these teams fell on. I mean, one of the things that was particularly interesting to me, a lot of people talked about the Big East getting 3 teams. That didn't shock me as much because Providence and St. John's and Seton Hall were kind of hovering on the lower side of the bubble. I thought they might throw the Big East a bone just because they're the Big East and get one of those teams in. I thought Seton Hall was most deserving of the 3, but that didn't really surprise me that the Big East just got 3. What surprised me was the disrespect towards the Mountain West. And I know the Mountain West, if you take out San Diego State from last year, who was 5-1, that conference is 0-11 over the last 4 tournaments, but every season is anew. And a lot of people have asked that question of, do you think that should be held against them, because they all in all, the conference outside of San Diego State hasn't done really well. Should that be held against them? And I kind of look at this and go, no, all these teams change every year. It should be a fresh slate. But it just seemed like the Mountain West was, every single team was like a seed line or two below where they had earned. And that was a struggle for me. And then you look at teams like Michigan State and Florida Atlantic. I mean, Michigan State's one thing. I can understand how Michigan State might squeak in the field from a resume standpoint and maybe get a higher seed based on the predictive metrics. But Florida Atlantic got in off their laurels of that Final Four run last year. It was, in my opinion, that was a complete joke as far as where they landed. Maybe they'll prove me wrong, but looking at what they did versus a year ago, the fact that they literally basically gave them the benefit of the doubt. FAU had a much better resume, a much better look last year. And I think they landed on the 8-line or 9-line. And for them to get the same thing with a far lesser resume for me was a joke, in my opinion.
100%, man. And you know what's interesting? Because you're talking like deserving a lot because you have St. John's number 23 and Villanova number 25 in your break. But you go by deserving, and also you can put a little strength in everything that you do. So I find that it was fascinating how you see teams like Virginia in there actually, and they're in the 60s in many sites. I got to check to see where exactly you had them. I looked this morning, pretty low, 58. You know, so it's like. Do you have a big problem with them? If it wasn't Virginia, would you have put in Indiana State? Who would you have put in?
Well, I was going to think Seton Hall. I had Oklahoma in, and that was kind of one that I wasn't 100% sure of. That one I can definitely understand being left out. Virginia, I would in the bracket that I submitted to the bracket matrix, I kind of second guessed myself on 2 or 3 occasions, and I think they all backfired. One of them was having Virginia in. I don't necessarily agree with Virginia being in, just watching them, but I look and one of the things that really caught my eye was their results-based metrics, where they were as of Friday, they were 37th in KPI, 25th in strength of record. That put them at an average of 31, which was far better than a lot of the teams that were on that bubble. I ended up taking them out because I looked and I said from quad 1A, they were 1-3, quad 1B, they were 1-3. Now remember, these are Friday numbers. I kind of have a cutoff because I kind of throw out Saturday and Sunday. But then, I thought they might be considered based on the fact that they were 8-3, I believe it is, in quad 2. But it sounds like, watching what the committee did on Sunday, it seems like quad 2s don't really even matter at all anymore.
No.
So I think what got Virginia in was that results-based metrics, which I kind of looked at and said, well, that's probably really good, but not enough considering what the quad 1 was. But, again, I think the frustration with a lot of people is the committee that a lot of people are trying to predict. They keep changing things up every single year. We don't know what the heck they're doing. This year it was far more predictive metrics. Seemed like they carried a lot more weight. It was just a little bit of a head scratcher in certain situations. And in fairness, they did have a lot of bid stealers, so I'm sure that they had to make a million contingencies for situations where if Temple wins that game on Sunday, things like that comes into play as well. But it just kind of ended up being one of the more disjointed messes that I've ever seen in Selection Sunday.
Going back to your Mountain West comment, they had 6 teams still in, and I know some of them are ranked pretty high. It's funny how New Mexico was like on the bubble and had to win it, yet their power looks pretty good compared to Boise State. Boise State complaining about going in. But you're right. Of course, they weren't seeded that good. But at the same time, it's like what argument you look at? The seeding argument that they got 6 in the conference, or the Big East where you got a 1 seed, a 2 seed, and a 3 seed. And how are they 1, 2, and 3 if the rest of the teams they played were tomato cans? It almost makes no sense to me. I feel like St. John's should have been in. I feel like Seton Hall probably should have been in if you compare it to letting Virginia in, Dayton in as an at-large, and Florida Atlantic, especially on what you said right there. So I even had a little bit of a problem with Boise State being in personally. But then again, I don't do this. This is something you've studied for a long time. I'm always like a strength guy, I'm always like, who am I going to bet on? It's so funny that I would bet Ohio State, to be honest, the way they're playing right now, over a lot of these teams. So it's always going to be that argument. But I'm going to say that the committee probably did a C or C plus. When I looked, I thought B or B plus because I thought that they did one thing that I really liked really good. And of course, keeping Oklahoma and out was in Wake Forest out was good. That was one thing. But I loved how they put Tennessee and Purdue in the same quadrant because those two coaches deserve each other from their past history success.
Yeah,
so I was happy about that. And I was also happy that I always look at the home court advantage. Not too many this year. Akron, 110 miles from the Paint Center, and Western Kentucky's 235 miles away, and Drake's 150 miles away from Omaha. But that's it. The rest of it goes to the top seeds, their home court in many cases, except for North Carolina. But I thought that they did pretty well not giving a really bad team home court against a good team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And about the Big East, I look at that and go, I just think the Big East, those top three teams kind of sucked all the air out of the room because they were so elite. UConn and Marquette and Creighton, they kind of created that little area of separation, whereas you usually don't see that in some of these conferences. You see it much more spread out, and that's how these teams, if you have teams that are very elite up here and you create this bubble, you push this down to where this is the cut line. In a lot of these other conferences, those teams aren't as elite, so it allows some of those teams to rise up. And I think that bubble between the top three teams and everybody else in the conference was maybe a little bit too big, and that was what cost the Big East in the number of bids they received.
100%. Well, great. Well, let's talk about your bracket, man. What do you got going on with the Final Four? Or you can just say, are you going by just how you kind of seeded it? Like how with the reason you made Haslametrics years ago in the past? What's your bracket look like?
No, I mean, the thing is, if there's going to be so much chalk, if you go by what the analytics do, and the chalk never plays out that way. So what I end up liking to do is there's certain rules that I kind of like to follow. I kind of have a little rule book based on past precedent of what's happened in the tournament, selecting a certain number of 12, 13, or 14s to go to the second round, a certain number of 6 seeds and lower going to the Sweet 16. I kind of force myself to do that, looking at the situation. Sure. But what I'd like to do is different from what I used to do for many years, is I kind of pick backwards now. I used to just start, first round games and then go to the second round games and then to the end. Now I kind of look and go, well, what were the teams that I've had good feelings about during the season? What are the teams that I've thrown futures on throughout the season? And 4 teams that I've thrown futures on early on this season are North Carolina, Duke, Gonzaga, and Creighton. Now the Gonzaga one, you can go, oh, well, for a championship, I did 85-1. That's why I chose that one, because they actually had the fingerprint of a national championship, a top 10 offense and a top 35 defense. As luck would have it, those 4 teams kind of get spread out amongst 3 different regions. And so it's one of the regions they have to meet each other, and I have to, pick one over the other. But I'm looking at, and then the 4th region just turned out the best team in the country, arguably UConn. So from the East, I'm going with UConn in the East. I'm sticking with my futures bet from about 2 months ago. In the West, I'm going with North Carolina. Another thing I want to tell people and say, I like to do this every year. Another one of my rules, you pick a 1, you pick a 1/2, you pick a 2/3, and then you pick a 4/5. So going in order, UConn is my absolute 1. In the West, I'm taking North Carolina. That's my 1/2 because they're the last one. They were borderline 1 and 2.
Okay.
If you go down to the Midwest, here's my 2/3. I'm going with Creighton. I believe in Creighton. That was a team. My biggest concern with them is going to be depth. But I look at the other teams and their matchups in that particular bracket. I still like what they have to offer. I'm going to go with Creighton. I thought that was a team that was probably could have won the whole thing last year if things would have gone their way. They just obviously could not quite get to the Final Four. They were as close as you could possibly get. And then in the South, which I think is going to be my bracket of destruction, which is going to just be teams tripping all over themselves. I think it's going to be a lot of carnage in the South. That's where I'm going to go with Duke. And that's one I'm, not necessarily 100% thrilled on, especially with the injury to Caleb Foster. But there's enough there, and the bottom half of the South looks. I mean, you should see the carnage they have going on in the bottom half of the South bracket. So whoever comes through the top half of the South bracket, I think might have a fairly clear shot to get to the Final Four. So I'm going to ride Duke. I know that my Wisconsin Badgers face Duke in the second round if they get through JMU. That will not change my allegiance to Wisconsin. But at this point, based on my future pick, I'm going to pick Duke for the Final Four there.
I struggled so much with the South, and that is, I can't believe I'm doing this, and I hate myself right now. But I went with Wisconsin. And I don't know why, because I'm nice. The kind of guy that bets against my team too. There's a couple reasons. And first of all, if Florida didn't injure their second string center that plays almost 50% of the minutes, I probably would have had Florida. But there's a few things here going on. I don't know about Kolek, and I think his oblique I've had an oblique injury, and it took about 4 weeks. And every time I breathe for about 2 to 3 weeks, every time I took a deep breath, it was pain. I know exactly what that is. That is a very painful injury. But he was also young. I probably did it in my 30s. He's younger than me. Maybe he bounces back quicker. It's just like a rib bruise type situation, a muscle bruise. It's painful. But in that midsection. And I think that even if Kolek plays, maybe they get by Florida. But the problem is when they played Wisconsin on full strength, Wisconsin beat them. And they've they've played against. Wisconsin's played against Marquette and Shaka Smart well over the past 5 years. It's like they know them. And a couple things about Wisconsin, they're getting hot. They're really hot during their tournament, and I thought they had a lot of things not go their way, especially against Purdue and a little bit against Illinois. But they've been playing good, and you have the senior leadership that's been in tournaments before. I'm not the biggest guard fan. I know that, and I get a lot of flack when Wisconsin's doing great. People, they throw it at me, being like, "Oh, now what do you think about guard?" All that, and I think he's a great. I think he's a great guy. Don't get me wrong. But Houston, I have a problem with their shooting. I have a massive problem with their shooting. If it is Marquette, I like Wisconsin. But if it's not Marquette, then I'm not sure if I like them. But I have to assume that Kentucky's too haphazard and they'll blow someone away, then they'll lose. And Duke is a little weak with Phil. I think Filipowski can be got to, I think. And so don't get me wrong. I think the South can be absolutely all over the place, but I just landed on Wisconsin, and maybe it's me wanting to go to the Final Four, which is about a 45-minute drive from here in Chandler, to see my Badgers. That would be absolutely wonderful, but that's just wishful thinking. I might go anyway. But I also hate myself because I have Tennessee in there. And it's almost like, it's like, you're going with Rick Barnes. Well, I did see Tennessee play at a pretty good strength against Wisconsin, and they blew them away when they played. And Tennessee, they've had their hiccups, but, Connect is such a great kid, and they finally have an offense. This team forever, when I look at KenPom, when I look at Hasametrics, their offense has showed up more this year, and I just finally see this team. And even with Rick Barnes' incompetence, I think that some of those guys can play through of that. And so now you have Purdue there. I think Zach Edey's going to have a bad officiating day where it's, unlike he was in the Big Ten play. I think that's very possible that, they get knocked out by somebody. And I think that's going to be Tennessee. So, but I do 100% agree with you. Having UConn and North Carolina, and UConn's been my number one team for the last 2 months. A lot of people say, yes, they have the toughest quadrant, and I think there's no disagreement there. But here's what I think we're overlooking at it too, and not just looking at my bracket, but what if Iowa State loses to like a Drake? What if Auburn has a hiccup against San Diego State? All of a sudden, the quadrant becomes pretty easy when it comes to upsets. So it's like you look at all this stuff. It's like these teams still have to win too. What if he's playing like a BYU in the Elite Eight? What if even Illinois they should be able to score with? So I have UConn winning it all, even though it's the toughest quadrant. I have North Carolina on the other side too, so we're not too far off. I'm really nervous about my other side though, and I need UConn to be such a popular pick. I need one of these to come through for me.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, we could talk all day about the South. Looking at this, first of all, it starts with Houston at the very top. I'm kind of not sold on Houston. I've always kind of said offense wins championships, defense wins games. But, that's the thing about Houston is you need to have a top 10 offense. Houston does not have that. My other concern about Houston has been their depth. It keeps whittling down more and more, and they've remained above water until now. But I think it's going to cost them in the long run. They lost Terrence Arsenault back in December to a torn Achilles, Ramon Walker to a torn meniscus in February. Then JoJo Tugler went down with a stress fracture in his foot in March. It just keeps getting thinner for Houston, and I think that will wear down on them eventually. So that's kind of the first team I have out. Wisconsin, again, I'm going to be rooting hard for Wisconsin, but I'm just having flashbacks to Iowa 2022, who all of a sudden got hot at the right time, a team that could shoot the ball, and got hot in the Big Ten tournament, and exactly got in the tournament as a 5 seed and got beat immediately by Richmond. That's my fear of what potentially could happen to Wisconsin in this tournament. I don't like to say that, but I think that's the way I kind of see it happening. And then you touched on the Marquette situation. Obviously, both injuries, Handlockton for Florida with the broken leg, the gruesome broken leg, and then the Marquette injury. They're very hush-hush on Kolek. They say he's fine, but, is he fine? And again, he's a young guy. He's probably going to be okay, but it seems a little bit too hush-hush for me, and I don't really know what to make of it all. So if you look at this whole bracket, the other thing I even touch on is I think my upset special, you're ready for it right now. My upset special is Oakland defeating Kentucky.
Woo! That is big.
I'm taking Oakland. And the reason why, when I look at games and say, and I don't see a lot of teams with this fingerprint, but I don't want these teams who are on the 13, 14, or 15 line. I'm looking at teams that were highly competitive with good teams. That doesn't have to be elite teams, but good or great teams. And early on in the season, Oakland lost by 6 at Ohio State. They lost by 11 at Illinois. They lost by 8 versus Drake on a neutral court, and they won by 2 at Xavier. So that's a little pieces of evidence that I think Oakland could shock Kentucky, especially since Kentucky, and you can throw Alabama in this group as well, those are 2 teams that have been highly susceptible for early round defeats because they are so elite offensively, but they're so lax defensively. We've seen this in the past from teams like LSU. Remember when Ohio State lost to Oral Roberts? It was the same story, and a really, really good offense, but we play defense some of the time. That's Kentucky, that's Alabama, and that's where I'm like, I was dying to pick Alabama to lose, but the committee did them a favor by giving them Alabama light in Charleston. And I'm like, I can't imagine a better draw for Alabama than Charleston, who's going to play their exact same style of play. It just doesn't have the talent to keep up with them. I don't like Alabama's long-term outlook, but, in that first round game, I was dying to pick against Alabama, and I just couldn't do it against Charleston.
Oh God, I know Charleston, no big wins, but I actually did pick Charleston against Alabama as a big upset, but believe it or not, the one right above it, I'm going to take Grand Canyon over St. Mary's.
Nice.
Here's the thing. I don't like teams that won their conference tournament. I believe in mental, emotional letdowns, and it could be subconscious, but the feeling of accomplishment changes a person, and they don't know it. They can't see it. They can't feel it. They're not sure about it. I'm a strong believer in that. And I'm kind of attacking my bracket a little bit that way. And that's kind of why I like Tennessee going far. I like North Carolina going far. The only one that I like is UConn, obviously. And Wisconsin lost in the championship game. I think they can feel like they can accomplish a little bit more. So I'm keying on that. But Alabama is just like Kentucky to me. Maybe even more of a poor man's Kentucky because this is not the same Alabama team. And what I like about Charleston is some of those guys returned from last year too, and they were so close to beating San Diego State. And I think that Alabama can be so bad on defense, and now that they're playing on a neutral court, that could take them out because they are one of the worst. I love this on Haslam metrics, by the way, the fingerprint. I love the away from home metrics so much, and I use it all the time. I talk about it constantly during basketball season. Alabama is just not that good away from home. And there's a lot of SEC teams really not good away from home and Big Ten. But Alabama is the 6th worst away from home in all of college basketball when it comes to your Haslam metrics. So those are my big upsets so far. And To be honest with you, I think that because we saw so much last year, I'm not picking a ton of big upsets. I think people are going to be like, "Ooh, James Madison against Wisconsin." They're going to think they're so cool and so like unique by doing that. It's like, no, dude. Everybody's picking McNeese over Gonzaga. Everybody's picking the 12-5 Wisconsin. Everyone's going to pick UAB over San Diego State, and probably there's going to be enough on Grand Canyon too. But I'm only sticking with Grand Canyon and Charleston on that side. But otherwise, I'm pretty chalky minus the South bracket.
Yeah, and you talked about Alabama. Boy, they have some really damning numbers lately with their number 362 in momentum. You talked about they were sixth worst in the away from home. That doesn't always mean they're terrible away from home. It just means there's a big discrepancy between their home performances and their away from home performances. But if you look at my site and you click on the Alabama team page right now, 6 of the last 7 games have received negative marks for Alabama. They're limping into the tournament a little bit. They've had 4 straight negative performances. They've lost 4 of 6. Even the games they won, they beat Arkansas, who's not particularly good. They had to go to overtime to win that game. So Alabama is, God, I mean, if there's a team that's a bigger mess right now, it's Alabama. I mean, and they're very explosive, no doubt about it. Oh, God, and I'm begging to pick against them. And yes, Charleston may go out there and play Alabama's game and beat them at it.
Well,
I just kind of looked at I
agree. You see it on your graph here, but also they just paid Nate Oates more. And it's almost like now they can relax a little bit. They just gave him a contract extension. I like Nate Oates, don't get me wrong, but that's just another reason to pick against him.
Right. And that's the thing. I was like, everything about them screams upset. And I mean, it's not absolute. I talked about how the fingerprint you want of a particular team to get to the Final Four, better yet, getting to a championship game, is going to be top 10 offensive efficiency, top 35 defensive efficiency. That's been the case every year going back to 2014, 2015. But that doesn't mean you can't have success playing a style of ball. A year ago, Miami went into the Selection Sunday at 25-7. They were number 43 in the country for me, 10th in the country in offensive efficiency, 133rd on defense, and they went to the Final Four. So you can't say people can't get there by playing that style of ball like Kentucky or Alabama does. I just don't think they have the full-on fingerprint that they can win 6 games in March.
Oh, 100%. I totally agree with you. Let's get into some games, and we're going to focus a little bit more on Thursday. And the very first game is going to be a fun one because Michigan State is playing Mississippi State. Mississippi State's +1 total is 130.5. Let's get into this game, but I think you said you have UConn winning it all, right? I missed that question.
I do.
Okay, you just like me.
No. Creighton.
You have Creighton winning it all. Okay.
Creighton,
you have a
Creighton
future.
Winning it all. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
No.
I totally forgot to ask that at your Final Four. So you have Creighton winning it all, and I actually have UConn. So there we go. 2 Big East teams. Look at that. We're a bunch of what a bunch of Big Ten sellouts we ended up being, my friend. Mississippi State, Michigan State. Anything on this one?
Well, on this one, I'm going to go with Michigan State on this one. I think that Izzo brings it every single March. People are going to say, well, he's not in the Final Four. I'm like, I don't care. He's getting to the Sweet 16. And he saw that last year where Michigan State came out, beat USC, came in the second round, beat Marquette. I'm not enamored with Mississippi State. In my opinion, Mississippi State was one of the teams I disliked the most coming into Selection Sunday. I thought there was a legitimate shot. Mississippi State should have been left out of the tournament. Another one, I don't know which is more obscene. I think probably FAU is more obscene, but Mississippi State getting an 8 to me is a joke as well. I think Michigan State has obviously not played its best basketball this year. It's had moments where they've had flashes of brilliance, but when you think about the high ceiling, who has a higher ceiling here between these two teams? And that's one of the things that I always kind of think about when it comes to March is a lot of these teams who have just squeaked in, who have not exactly played their best basketball, all of a sudden find a way to get there. And Michigan State, without question, as people were ranking them top 5 before the season, they have a very, very, very high ceiling. They have failed to achieve that. We've seen the same thing out of Kansas this year. Kansas is a different story now with the loss of McCullough for the rest of the season. But Michigan State has the health. They have the guys. You saw that they were competitive with Purdue in that game. When they play their best basketball, I don't think Mississippi State can touch them. I'm taking the Spartans in this one.
Absolutely, man. And there is no disagreement there because I think everyone's going to be picking Mississippi State, and this because just how they made a run in their SEC tournament. Well, they were kind of feeling like they needed to win to get into a little bit. And I think just like on Haslametric shows, Michigan State has some advantages. Michigan State might not like completely deserve to get in, and I've heard a lot about that. I think they're powerful enough, and they've lost close games. But they're near proximity, 22nd adjusted for strength schedule for Michigan State, and then Mississippi State had defended it 204th. That's a very big discrepancy on that. So I'm looking at that. I like that. I like that they can get some fast break points. But if you look at Mississippi State on offense, it's all no green. The only green that they have is second chance points, and it's not that big because Michigan State can still rebound the ball. Michigan State's got some bigger guys. I'll take Izzo as a favorite role too. It's like basically a pick 'em here. I think Mississippi State accomplished what they needed to do to get to the dance. I think Michigan State is going to win this just based upon some of those numbers and some of those metrics that I like. I also think that they had more time to prep. Michigan State kind of went out a little bit early. I'm okay with that. And guess what? Michigan State gets to hear from everybody that they shouldn't have got in. Yeah, they're motivated, my man. Let's take them.
Yeah, I'm going to go with them. I know there's an argument that can be made that Mississippi State, when you look at my away from home metrics, Mississippi State has a pretty large advantage. They're 41st in away from home. Michigan State is 316th. Again, like I said, that doesn't necessarily mean that Michigan State is terrible away from home. Just sometimes it just really exposes a discrepancy between home performances and neutral/away performances. But that being said, like I said, I've always kind of thought about the tournament, and there's certain intangibles about the tournament where you can't go strictly based on the metrics. You got to go by feel. And one of my feels that I go with, and I recommend this to everybody, is look at those teams that had a higher resume, not a resume. Maybe resume is a poor way of saying it, but just a higher ceiling, a perceived ceiling back in November and December. And if they get into the tournament and they sometimes squeak in, like Michigan State does, they have the potential to hit that ceiling in March. I just think their ceiling is so much more higher than Mississippi State's is.
I 100% agree. And, it's pretty much a pick of -1. I laid it for 2 stars. Great points on that one. I think that this is all Izzo here in the beginning of this tournament. Lots and lots of experience here for Tom Izzo. Okay, let's move on to Duquesne versus BYU. BYU -9, total 142. Any thoughts on this one?
Well, this is going to be one of my upsets here. And I've never been a believer in BYU. I think BYU, if there's I can criticize my own metrics, and there have been some criticism about BYU and saying, well, the reason they inflated their metrics because they were winning games by 35, 40, 45 points back in November and December. Now, if you don't play some serious opposition, the analytics have to go off with what they have. And they're looking at those games and going, well, that's the performances we would expect to get from Purdue or Connecticut or Houston. So that's how they rise up and get to that level. Now, when they got to Big 12 play, to their credit, they actually did quite well for themselves. So they've earned their position on the 6 line. I thought they even could have gotten to the 5 line, to be honest with you. But one of the things, and I just touched on this before about the away from home metrics, and these are the numbers from the other day. I don't know if these changed by 1 or 2, but BYU away from home is 350 in my 350th in my metric. Duquesne 23rd, and this is another thing. So I think BYU has been a little bit inflated. I think Duquesne comes into this game with a lot of momentum. They're 24th in momentum, 23rd away from home, and it just feels like I talked about BYU just struggling a little bit more away from home. This kind of has all the pieces in place to have that vintage 11/6 right here. I still think this is, if you're looking at all the 11s versus the 6s, this is probably as good an upset pick as any, in my opinion. Wow. I just can't be a long-term believer in BYU. And it kind of ties into what I talked about with Michigan State, just the flip side. Nobody saw BYU coming before the regular season. So I think, to their credit, if their ceiling was here, BYU largely throughout the season played up to here. They played pretty close to their ceiling. One could argue Wisconsin did the same thing. But the question is, all it takes is one game once you get to March. And if this is your ceiling here only, and all of a sudden you've been playing here, but you have one game down here. We saw that last year with Iowa State when they were in the same position and fell down 22-2 to Pittsburgh in that game. the same thing, the same fate could befall BYU here.
Yeah, I'm going to also mention that I believe they're away from home a lot more than Sparty because the Big Ten officiating was so bad to away teams that they're 56% were hitting at home against the spread, and that was even after they were juiced. And we're talking like 4 or 5 point home court advantages. So I'm not buying the away from home as much in the Big Ten, but I am buying it for BYU because I watch BYU play on the road. They're absolutely terrible. But what do you get when you have a smaller conference team that plays slow, great defense, can't shoot the ball well, against a power conference team that performs quite poorly away from home? You get unders. You get the under, my man. Right. I am taking under 142.5. It's at 142. I would take it again at 142. I don't see a lot of points here. I had Duquesne win in the A10, so that was my biggest conference tournament win at 14-1. Real happy about that. Little humble brag here. But I'm still going with the under here, baby. I love the under. So we'll ride with that one. Okay, Akron Creighton. And Akron is going to be about a 12.5 point dog against Creighton. Now, 141.5. Yeah. I'm interested in what you got to hear because you got Creighton going all the way in your bracket. So any thoughts on this game?
Well, in this one, I think that, I have it even, I've Creighton by, I think it's almost 16. It's like 15.5 or 16. But I could definitely see Akron giving Creighton a little bit of a scare, kind of the way they did with UCLA 2 seasons ago. It's a little bit of a different animal than it was then. That Akron team is a lot slower. Right now, Akron is 241st in pace. But there's, outside of a lot of their numbers don't really jump out at me. I mean, this is maybe what scares me a little bit. And I'll explain in a second because they're 141st in my rankings. They're 197th offensively, 100th defensively. So none of them are better than 100th, none of those rankings. But what scares me is, as my good friend Michael Hunter said, he said, when you're picking your brackets, if you do multiple brackets, he said, think of the one game where you don't even think about it. You just kind of write this one team in. You're like, you don't even consider this other team. I'm worried that people are throwing Creighton in and no one's going to consider Akron. And as a result, Akron's going to find some way to sneak this out. And we saw what Akron did 2 years ago. They really put a scare in UCLA. Like I said, different team, a little bit different style. The numbers don't seem to favor Akron. I'm a believer in Creighton, but God, I may not touch this one because sometimes I think that Akron could put a scare into Creighton. And if you put a scare in Creighton, I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. Some of these early tournament scares can be very, very healthy for some of these teams who are looking long-term to succeed, because if you put a scare in them, it's a kind of a wake-up call, and they start saying the question, or looking around and saying, hey, we cannot take these teams for granted early on in the tournament. We have to play every single game and focus on every single opponent. I don't know if Akron's going to provide that scare, but that's my fear.
I also fear a little bit for Creighton that they haven't performed all that well in neutral courts early in the season. They lost that bad one to Colorado State. They also lost semi-away game at UNLV, and that was a little concerning as well. The only neutral one they won was Loyola, and once they got to their Big East tournament, that was bad. I think that they're a little scary here because Akron's going to be very close from home. They're only 110 miles away, and if you double that with the other fans there, they just want to see upsets. They don't have Creighton going, and that can get a little worried. Akron doesn't deserve to be in because of what happened to Kent State. I don't know if that probably has nothing to do with the handicap, but I do feel bad for Kent State. But Akron didn't look all that great that game either. Akron, I saw them. I tried to play them against James Madison away. Tried to be a sneaky little play at +6, +7. They lost by about 10 or 12 points, something like that. I can't remember. But I don't think Akron's that good. But this could be another underplay as well because Creighton sneakily has a better defense than they have in the past. And so I think that they're going to play some defense and maybe the shots ain't falling right away for them. First half under type situation. That's what I lean in this situation. So we'll give you a lean to the under. Next game, we have Oregon versus South Carolina. South Carolina -1, total 133. Now, this is one of those interesting games where I really thought about it because Oregon wins their conference tournament, but this goes right back to my angle that I don't like being on conference tournament teams, especially when they accomplished everything to get to the tournament, now it's letdown city. I like how South Carolina slows the game down, ranking 347th in average possession length. South Carolina's got a solid rebounding team. They don't turn the ball over. Oregon goes through cold spells. They can't afford to lose possessions in this slow-paced game that they're going to get. I think that Arizona just played like absolute crap against them, and it was just really weird after that USC win. USC played bad against Arizona. The Gamecocks, one of the best ATS this year, 23-10, and I'm getting the Gamecocks against a team that probably wasn't going to get in at -1. Sign me up, man. Sign me up for South Carolina. Lamont Paris, yeah, baby. Let's go. We'll go -1 for 2 stars there, Eric.
Yeah, I think it's going to be -1 as well on my spread. I look at this, they got to find a way to stop N'Faly Dante. He scored 22 against UCLA. Then in the final, he went 12-12 against Colorado, scored 25 points.
Insane.
He's been just he's been a beast inside. Just really across the board, a lot of similarities between these teams, just a lot of balance. They're within 10 of each other in my rankings. Slightly better offense for South Carolina, and they're basically on top of each other defensively. Not much of a change there. This is going to be a really tough one. Again, the South Carolina team has been so providency. That's the word I've given an adjective. 2022 providency, I say. A team that has been, one of those teams that found ways to win during the regular season, but never quite rose up to the level of respect that you normally see from the predictive metrics. Now, they have climbed. They were hovering in the 60s and 70s for a while. They are back now into the top 50, number 48 for me, but far from elite for a team that you find on the 6th line. You know what I mean? So the predictive analytics don't really believe in them, but to their credit, they do find ways to win. And the question is Oregon's luck now going to run out? I mean, I made the very similar statement about Wisconsin of they went on a nice little run, but have they burdened themselves out? Have they peaked too soon? Now, all of a sudden you go back to back wins for Oregon. Are they due for regression here? And if so, South Carolina could very well take advantage here. One of the things defensively I want to note about if you're going to stop Dante, near proximity attempt rate defensively for South Carolina, 138th in the country, but they are 20th in defensive near proximity percentage, stopping the shots on the inside. That will benefit South Carolina greatly. I think they have the tools to beat Oregon here, and I think they have the tools to cover versus Oregon here.
Absolutely. Colorado State's destroying Virginia. Virginia finally just got to 25 points with 12 minutes left in the second half. It's 42-25. It was just 21, so they must have got a steal or something. But dude,
Jekyll and Hyde. It's the two-faced team. I mean, they are the most inconsistent team in Division I. They are all over the map. You never know which Virginia you're going to get. And I'm frankly kind of glad to see them go because
they shouldn't be in. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, as far as like they basically got in off those results-based metrics, which again, you're looking at 2 metrics which are really, in my opinion, very, very arbitrary.
Well, going back to what you said, they're like, the teams that are hot right now. Let's look at the teams that are hot right now. Well, St. John's went to the championship game. You used that excuse a million times before, and now you're not. It's like they keep changing it, like you said before. They keep changing it. It throws me nuts.
Well, and they did the same thing with the Mountain West, and we're rehashing this, I know, but the Mountain West, they said, well, the Mountain West got all those quad 1 victories by playing each other. Well, what did the Big 12 do? Did the Big 12 do the same thing? I mean, that's the joke of the matter, and I think they kind of relied, on we're kind of rehashing this and circling back, but they really hit hard on that non-conference strength of schedule, which you're not going to see me agreeing with Jay Billis very often, but if you're talking about the total body of work, the entire body of work, then why are we even talking about non-conference strength of the schedule? If we're going to consider it that much, then don't ever say the entire body of work like they have in the past, because it's an outright lie.
Right.
They're going to, I mean, and that's where bracketologists myself are like, they change their story every year.
Drives me nuts. Thanks for and I don't want to keep on this subject, but thanks for the comment, ZZ30. I don't want to jinx my bet either, because my first and largest bet was against Virginia today. So we'll see if that comes to fruition, buddy. McNeese State versus Gonzaga. Gonzaga is about -6. It was 6.5. The total is 150.5. I will let you have a future on Gonzaga. You have the floor.
I do. Gonzaga was my, they just fell out of my elite club of top 10 offensive efficiency, top 35 defensive efficiency, because they're 5th in offense, 36th on defense. And that scares me a little bit, because it reminds me of a team a year ago who was just outside, named Arizona, who got bounced on day one by Princeton last year. And that kind of scares me a little bit. But the thing I like about Gonzaga is that they were in that elite club all year round, and nobody really knew about them. They've kind of been under the radar. They really did not score a lot of quality wins early on. They struggled. They finally get the win over St. Mary's, and then they get the win over Kentucky, which kind of put them in the tournament and on the map a little bit more. But at one point, even it was either right before the Kentucky game or shortly afterwards, they were hovering in that top 10 range offensively and top 35, 40 range defensively. And I'm looking at the Creightons and the Dukes and the North Carolinas 21 to 1, 24 to 1, 28 to 1. And here's Gonzaga sitting there at 85 to 1. I could not resist. I thought that Gonzaga, in theory, had the potential and the chops to actually make a little bit of a dent in this tournament, maybe even go to the Final Four. If anything, how much poetic justice would it be with Gonzaga every year with the high expectations with Drew Timme, and they cannot reach the pinnacle, to have a Gonzaga team that all of a sudden comes out of the blue and makes a run to the Final Four when you least expect it. I think Gonzaga could potentially give Purdue a major problem if that matchup happens in the Sweet 16. So in this situation, I know that McNeese is a very, very popular pick with Will Wade as their coach, returning to the NCAA tournament. I'm still going with Gonzaga. I believe in the Zags. I believe the Zags are headed for the Sweet 16.
You love your Zags for a long time, and I've been always hoping Mark Few is going to win one. But look at this. You got an 8 point spread here. It's 6. Do you smell that?
Yep.
It smells like a public dog to me, my man. The public all over McNeese State. Now, look, I liked McNeese this year. I've made some bets on them. They've got unbettable at some point, but they were still winning by 20 points, so they're still covering. But, this is a situation where McNeese hasn't played anybody, my man, anybody. You looked at the metrics there. Gonzaga's got tons of advantages head-to-head on them. Mark Few is a tournament coach. He's been here a million times. He's been in the last 28 WCC tournament games. Finals. Are you serious? He's been in that many in a row. Probably won most of them as well, clearly. So, I like what McNeese did this year, but this should be a 7.5 to 8 point spread. I'm just going to set it out. This thing might dog down to 5.5, 5. I don't know. But this just feels like such a public dog, and you really want to get on this. Yeah. Gonzaga, number 1 in near proximity shots. McNeese, 203rd in defending it. Yeah, Gonzaga should wipe the floor with them. Absolutely. I'll be on Gonzaga. I'm going to give you a lean at -6 right now, but hey, I'm probably going to be on them at some point as soon as the number kind of settles. Next game, South Dakota State versus Iowa State. Iowa State -17, total 135.5. Danger, Will Robinson is what I say in this one, because Iowa State's fat and happy. They just bombed away on Houston, and man, I think that McNeese State might have beat Houston last game. But, look at this. Only 109th in effective field goal percentage, 55th in offensive efficiency. I think there's some serious red flags for this Iowa State team, and I know they're great on defense, but they're another team that's been terrible on the road. And do you know what the Jackrabbits feel like to me? They feel like that Baltimore, Maryland Retrievers team that just couldn't stop hitting it against Virginia when Virginia lost as a 1 seed. Well, they can jack up some threes. 38.2% from three-point land. This could be very scary if they're coming off high ball screens and hitting for Iowa State, because Iowa State, I don't look at them as a massive comeback team. Do I see a scenario where Iowa State locks them down and wins by 20? Yes. But, man, I am tempted as heck to go with South Dakota State with the 17 points in my pocket. What are your thoughts?
Defense wins games, offense wins championships. I don't think the long-term outlook for Iowa State is something I really believe in. And you talked about, well, one of the things about Iowa State that they do very, very well is they are number one in the country for me in potential points off of steals. They're going to try to force turnovers, and God knows they're going to have opportunities to do that against South Dakota State. I think that game last year where Iowa State really was terrible in their first game against Pittsburgh and they couldn't rally back, that's going to be in their minds. They're going to be chomping at the bit to prove the doubters wrong in this one. They're going to take it out on South Dakota State. I've never been a huge fan of the Dakotas whenever they make the NCAA tournament. It just seems like a lot of people look to the Summit League. They usually have a lot of shooters that can, put a dent in somebody, but the Dakota teams have always let me down in the tournament. I kind of shy away from them. Granted, South Dakota State, 95th in the country in three-point attempt rate, 92nd at adjusted three-point percentage. They can hit those shots. That's not a bad offense at all, but you're playing a completely different animal here. I mean, you're playing the second best defense in the country per my ratings. Houston is otherworldly at number one, but the fact that Iowa State is up there at number two, I mean, there's such an elite defense. I think they're going to give trouble. I can't see South Dakota State not having a world of trouble with Iowa State's pressure. Excuse me. South Dakota State, like I said, the Dakotas never seem to perform well in the NCAA tournament. I kind of look at that as well. Iowa State chomping at the bit after a bad deal of things last year. A lot of things working in Iowa State's favor. I don't know if I'm going to touch this one, but in this situation, I think Iowa State cruises.
Well, you have the number at 17.37. So you're a little bit more shying towards the playing Iowa State. So I get that. And that's just coming from straight analytics and metrics. I'm still worried about Iowa State away from home and the fact that just won it. So it's a lean right now for me, but this thing can get up to 20 at any moment. So we'll possibly have to make it play on my side of things if that happens. Let's go to NC State versus Texas Tech. Texas Tech's going to be laying about 5.5 points. The total is 145.5. Wow, it's 5.5 while you played NC State. What's this line telling you, Erik?
Well, I mean, it is, so I have Texas Tech in this one by 3. The question with this one is going to be really NC State. It's just such a, I won't say Jekyll and Hyde yet, just because with Virginia it was kind of like night to night. You didn't know which Virginia team you were going to get. With this NC State team, what's so puzzling is going into the ACC tournament, they had lost 4 straight. They had lost 7 of 9. They looked nothing like a team that was going to be in contention, and all of a sudden they go out there and they beat Louisville, and not particularly great, but all of a sudden they flip the switch and they bury Syracuse. They look really good against Duke. They a hard-fought game against Virginia, and then they beat North Carolina. 5 games in 5 days. Did they flip a switch, or are they burned out? That's going to be the question. Now, I've never been terribly enamored with Texas Tech. That's still, to me, I look at that roster and I'm just not a huge believer. I know they have had some recent injury issues as well, that I don't know if everybody's healed up there all the way right now, but that's another team that I don't really believe in. So I could definitely see NC State keeping its run going. It's not to say that runs can't keep going after you've been hot in a conference tournament. A year ago, San Diego State won 3 straight games en route to winning the Mountain West Championship, and then they went 5 games, won another 5 games to get to the championship game before losing to UConn. So just because you go on a streak before the NCAA tournament starts doesn't mean you can't continue it. I think this sets up nicely for NC State. As I said before, the teams in this bracket are just primed to fall. And NC State, that would be a team that I could definitely see going somewhere, keeping that streak going, maybe winning 4 games. I don't know about 4, but maybe 3 games in this bracket. I'm just not enamored with any of the teams in this bracket. If you're looking for an upset, the bottom half of the South feels ripe for the pick.
I'm sure a lot of people are wondering why this line is so big after NC State ripped through the ACC, and I'll say why. Because the market knows how hard it is to bounce back from that kind of emotional accomplishment. And This line feels like a sucker play if you're going to grab. It's just NC State. It's begging you to bet NC State. When I see lines begging you to do something like this much, that's when you get a little bit nervous, man, in this situation. I think it's just factored in. I think 3 is correct on any other circumstance, and I think 5.5 is correct with the letdown situation and the kind of advantages that Texas Tech has in this matchup. I think they have a 3-point advantage according to your Haslam metrics, and they have a near proximity. When I love near proximity rim and 3 rate. I love that a lot. And I think the market's got the letdown and factored in. I think it's a perfect number, though. Also, I'm not touching it. I'm going to run away from this game. I'm going to be real interested to find the result. I don't even know if I want to watch the game, but I'm going to be real interested on who kind of comes out here, especially when seeing this very strange line. All right, we got about 5 minutes. Drake.
Well, I'm gonna just go throw in there. I know that Texas Tech, just in case people are listening, they lost Devin Cambridge out for the year that was back in December. But Warren Washington was out definitely in the middle or late February with a foot injury. Kyron Lindsey out definitely with an undisclosed injury. They played 7 guys in that loss to Houston. I don't know the status in Washington and Lindsey if they're going to be ready for this game, but that's another kind of one more thing to contemplate before picking your brackets.
Oh yeah, I mean, great point. There's not sure if Lindsey's going to suit up, so that's interesting. Right. Warren Washington is idle with a foot injury. Well, geez, I mean, injuries are huge. Yeah, that's not factoring in so far. That is a little bit of more of a head scratcher. So there you go. Great call on that. Always look at your injuries. Let's get to the final game that I have written down, which is Drake, and they're playing Washington State. Washington State +2 total 137.5. I hate the Drake, but I do not hate the fact that they're 150 miles away from Omaha. Man, it's. Yep. I mean, geez, that's the only one that really stuck out to me. Well, Akron did a little bit in Western Kentucky too, but I still kind of like Washington State. Their guard Miles Rice, I think he's a stud. But at the same time, you look at what they accomplished. It's only Arizona. I was on them against Washington, their final game of the season. What the hell happened there? And what happened against Colorado? They were in the game at the end, missing free throws. Just played their way out of that game. I had them like +3 and they lost by 5. There's something wrong with this team too. It's like they only beat Arizona. I switched my pick from Washington to Drake, but I'm not sure if I'm going to bet it. If I get a +3 on any side, I'd bet it. It's not going to happen probably. So I'm passing, but I'm going to pick Drake to advance.
Yeah, I'm also picking Drake to advance. They got to be able to make their shots, though. They shoot their 12th in the country in adjusted 3-point percentage. Makes up a healthy 38% of their shot attempts from behind the 3-point line. The problem is those shots better fall because you're not going to get many second chances against Washington State. When it comes to the second chance metrics, the defensive ones, potential points off of second chances, 37th in the country for Washington State defensively. And then in second chance conversion percentage defensively, 27th in the country. You're not going to have a lot of second chances. So those Drake shots had better fall. Again, here's another team that might just be motivated. They got really close last year, gave Miami a good run. Miami ended up going to the Final Four. Drake hung with them most of the way. Can Drake be motivated? Are they going to take the step forward this year and finally take it to the next level, which is the second round of the NCAA tournament, and to meet potentially a very intriguing matchup against Iowa State?
Very, very intriguing. I would love to see Drake against Iowa State. So any other Thursday games that you want to discuss?
I think we pretty much covered most of them. I'm trying to look at.
I kind of skipped the big spreads, like the big 1 seeds versus, in a couple play-ins. I skipped. Go ahead.
I know. I was going to say I talked about Oakland being my upset special in that one against Kentucky. The one that we also haven't talked about is the situation that unfolded in the last couple hours where Bill Self said that Kevin McCullough is going to be done for the year. So all of a sudden, this is going to make things very, very interesting with the Kansas game against Samford. I don't know what the spread was or where it's going to go towards, but I'm inclined to stay away from it because, again, for a lot of different reasons, because the ceiling is still pretty high for Kansas, but they've gotten nowhere near it. They're another Virginia. They're a team that just lacks motivation. They've lacked focus. They can bring it when they're motivated, but it seems like it's 1 out of every 4 times. You cannot rely on Kansas to be there on any given day. You saw it, the body language. They just didn't have it in that Cincinnati game. Granted, you didn't have Dickinson in that game either, but Dickinson does provide a different dynamic if he's healthy. I mean, he's on the court. I think he can make an impact in that game against Samford, but boy, losing McCullough is a big loss. But you got to remember this team. DeJuan Harris is still there. KJ Adams is still there. Furphy is still there. Elmarco Jackson's still there. All these guys are quality players. They can hit a ceiling, but boy, losing McCullough is a big loss. I don't know how that's going to affect them long term, but I don't think the outlook for Kansas is particularly positive.
Not at all, my man. I agree, and it dropped down to 7. But this could be that rally game too for them. I think they might quit too, and I had them quit against Cincinnati in their Big 12 tournament, and that was an easy win. But this could be just a quick rally. We're Kansas, let's show them, and then they'll falter the next one too. So it's gotten so small that against a Samford team, this talent is still way higher than Samford. Sorry, it is. I like Samford, but I'm not going to get there with them. Anything for Friday, real quick?
Well, on Friday, let me take a quick glance at things here. I know our Wisconsin Badgers are going on late. I hope those are going to be 2 full days at the bar for me. So by 8:40 p.m. Central Time, I'm going to be pretty much.
I'll text you to see if you can text me back.
Getting pretty tight. At that point, it's not so much anything that I'm going into the bar like the alcohol related. It's just a lot of those are long days for me, man. I'm just I get really tired. I hit the Red Bull during the day on Friday, but nothing really stood out to me there. I think that New Mexico Clemson game brings a lot of intrigue. I think that I was convinced with a friend of mine Eli Hershkovitz was really kind of sold on Clemson making a difference with Jack Clark back with PJ Hall, that 1-2 punch. They kind of had a lot of features about Clemson that I kind of did like. And I could see Clemson kind of digging themselves out of a hole and making a little bit of an unexpected run. I know a lot of people aren't giving them a lot of credit, but that's the thing. I'll
fade them out west with Clemson. I like Clemson, absolutely.
Yeah, and I love to find these little hidden gems, the ones that people are kind of, they're not playing their best basketball. Then all of a sudden they get their act together because they're a better team than what they've played the last few weeks. And I think that Clemson could be that team who could make some noise in the West.
I like it. Absolutely. That's going to make some noise. But what else is making some noise is HaslamMetrics.com. And I got to say, man, you are closer to the spreads in the market than any of these other efficiency sites. Sorry, I had to tell you that. I completely agree that your site has the standard deviation much better towards actually matching up with what Vegas is doing and what obviously the market's doing. So congratulations on that. And thank you so much for coming on, Erik. Really appreciate all your insights, my man. If you guys haven't, make sure you guys check out Haslam Metrics. But Erik, it's always been a pleasure to have you on.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, my friends, make sure you check out Erik at Haslam Metrics on Twitter and check out these wonderful stats and matchups. It's all there at HaslamMetrics.com. All right, as a quick recap, we are taking Sparty at -1 for 2 stars. Duquesne versus BYU under 142 for 2 stars. We are taking South Carolina -1 for 2 stars. We are definitely leaning to the under in Akron versus Creighton, 141.5, leaning Gonzaga. I'll probably get to the window with Gonzaga. That number's off. I'm considering South Dakota State. Erik wasn't, but it's at 17 now. No rush whatsoever for me. And NC State versus Texas Tech, I am staying away from. And Drake versus Washington State, I'm just taking them to advance. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Tomorrow we are going to bring on Will Hill to discuss the Friday games. Make sure you check out the website for our articles in March Madness and the NCAA tournament. Make sure you get into these huge bracket games that we have over at the oddsbreakers.com, link to the season. Have a blast watching the first play-in games and go get some winners.